You've definitely heard of Plato's Republic, right? It's one of the most famous books ever written, and for a very good reason. For almost 2,500 years, it's been forcing us to grapple with a huge question about how we live. And honestly, it feels more relevant today than ever. The question is actually pretty simple.
And that's it. That's the question that kicks off this entire epic dialogue. I mean, really think about it. Is it always, in every single situation, better to do the right thing? Even if you knew you could get away with doing the wrong thing and totally benefit from it? Yeah, it's not an easy one to answer, and Plato takes us on this incredible intellectual journey to figure it out. But right out of the gate, before Socrates can even really get going, he gets hit with this powerful, kind of cynical challenge from a guy named Thrasymachus. He basically argues that justice is just a fancy word that powerful people use to justify whatever's in their own best interest. Might makes right. The whole rest of the book, really, is Plato's attempt to prove this guy wrong.
So, to take on that argument, Socrates realizes they have a problem. Trying to define justice in a single person, he says, is like trying to read tiny, tiny letters from really far away. It's just too small, too difficult to see clearly. So, he proposes this brilliant shift in focus.
He says, okay, forget the individual for a second. Let's build a perfect city, a Callipolis, right here in our conversation. The idea is that by designing a completely just state, where justice is written in huge, obvious letters, we can then look at that model and see how it maps back onto the individual soul. It's a fantastic strategy, and it sets the stage for everything that follows.
And this move, this change in perspective, brings us to the absolute core idea of the entire Republic. It's called the city-soul analogy, and it's the foundation for Plato's whole argument.
So, the city-soul analogy. The idea is simple, but it is so profound. It says that a perfectly just city and a perfectly just person have the exact same three-part structure. The harmony or the chaos that you see in a society is just a larger reflection of the harmony or chaos inside the souls of its people.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting. Let's break this down. At the very top of the city, you've got the rulers, the guardians. They govern using reason. This corresponds to the rational part of your own soul, the part that loves truth and figures things out. Next, you have the auxiliaries, who are the soldiers. They protect the city using spirit. Courage, honor, righteous anger. That's like the emotional, fiery part of your soul. And at the bottom, you have the producers, the farmers, the craftsmen. They take care of the city's basic needs, and they're driven by appetite, just like our own desires for food, drink, wealth, all of that. For Plato, justice, in both the city and the soul, is when each of these parts does its job and only its job, and doesn't try to meddle with the others. So, to make sure every part of this city stays in its own lane and does its job properly, Plato puts forward some, well, let's just say they're pretty radical ideas. You have to remember, he's conducting a thought experiment, and he's willing to sacrifice a lot of what we consider normal for the good of the whole state. And this list really shows you just how far he was willing to go. I mean, we're talking about completely abolishing the private family for the ruling class. We're talking about state-controlled breeding programs to create the best possible citizens. Strict censorship of art and music to make sure everyone has the right state of mind. He even proposes a noble lie, a foundational myth the state tells everyone to convince them of their natural place in society. And maybe the most shocking of all, to get this perfect city started, you'd have to exile everyone over the age of 10 and start fresh with the kids. It's a lot. Now, the absolute bedrock holding this entire kind of crazy system together is education. But it's not just about learning math and history. It's a lifelong, rigorous process designed to shape a person's character, to filter out those who aren't suited for leadership, and to train the very best to become true lovers of wisdom, the only people fit to rule. So this whole structure, this entire city, it all depends on its leaders. And that brings us to the most famous and probably the most controversial question in the whole book. Who exactly gets to be in charge of all this? After all that intense training, all that sacrifice, who has actually earned the right to have ultimate power in this perfect state? I mean, who could you possibly trust to never, ever be corrupted by that kind of power? Plato's answer is blunt and totally unequivocal. The only person fit to rule is the philosopher king. Not a politician, not a general, not the richest person in town. Only the philosopher, the one person who truly loves wisdom and understands reality, is qualified to govern. So why a philosopher? What makes them so special?
To explain this, Plato gives us what might be the most powerful and enduring metaphor in all of Western thought, the allegory of the cave. It's a story about what true enlightenment and education really look like.
Let's walk through it. Picture a group of people who've been chained up in a cave their entire lives. All they can see are shadows flickering on the wall in front of them, and they think that's reality. That's most of us, Plato says, mistaking appearances for the real thing. Then, one prisoner is set free and is dragged out of the cave into the sunlight. At first, it's painful and confusing, but eventually his eyes adjust and he sees the real world for the first time. And he understands the source of all light and reality, which Plato calls the idea of the good. But, and this is the absolute key, his journey isn't over. He has a duty. He can't just hang out in the sun. He has to go back down into the darkness of the cave to try and rule and enlighten the other prisoners, even if they think he's crazy and hate him for it.
But here's the thing. Plato was no wide-eyed optimist. He knew that even this perfect city, run by these all-wise philosopher kings, couldn't last forever. He believed that everything humans create is eventually doomed to fall apart.
And he lays out this inevitable decay in 5 stages. You start at the top with aristocracy, the rule of the best. But that decays into a timocracy, where the honor-loving warriors take over. That then devolves into an oligarchy, the rule of the rich. After that, the people's desire for total freedom leads to democracy, which, and this is always a shock to people today, Plato saw as a chaotic state ruled by everyone's base appetites. And finally, out of that democratic chaos, a strongman rises to take control, leading to the worst possible state, tyranny.
And with that, we come full circle, right back to that city-soul analogy. The tyrannical state is just a giant version of the tyrannical soul, a person who is completely enslaved by their lowest, most monstrous desires. This person is the most unjust man imaginable, the absolute polar opposite of the just philosopher.
So you might be thinking, if this perfect city is impossible to actually build and it's doomed to fail anyway, then what was the point of all this? What are we as regular people supposed to take away from this grand and kind of strange vision? Well, Plato gives us the answer right here. The real point was never to give us a political blueprint to build in the real world. The Republic is actually a guide for the soul. The ideal city is a pattern in heaven that we can look to try and bring our own inner state, our own reason, spirit, and appetites into a perfect, just harmony. It doesn't matter if we can ever actually build it on Earth.
And that really leaves us with one last big question to think about. Does an ideal, a perfect model, have to be achievable in reality for it to be valuable? Or is the very act of trying to live by that pattern in heaven what actually gives our lives meaning and makes us just people, no matter what the world around us looks like?